Common Man Dan Cole here, host of House of Pain. With me is Dennis Thompson, actually the co-host, House of Pain and the ARP Wave System. Dennis is the founder. Dennis, I find it interesting. Well, first of all, we met actually on the phone several years ago when I interviewed you along with Craig Waring for the Tee to Green show, and lo and behold, we hooked up again at the golf show this past February at the Metrodome. Speaking of House of Pain, I have to get this in there. It was my favorite nickname of a stadium, because that's what the Houston Oilers used to call the Astrodome, was the House of Pain.
That's exactly right.
And so we've got our own House of Pain here. Let's get right to it. What is the ARP Wave System?
Well, the system, Common, is based on a premise that all injury happens because of an inability of the body to absorb force. And because of that inability to absorb force, we end up with problems in tissue. And the system is designed to first off find out where the origin of the problem came from, and looking at it neurologically, not physiologically, because we believe everything is a neurological phenomena that creates a physiological end. So in other words, if your muscles aren't turning on fast enough, neurologically speaking, they cannot absorb force. And when they can't absorb force, you're going to be hurt. So the system is based on three components. The first thing is find out, is the nervous system sending the appropriate electrical signal to the muscles to where they can turn on fast enough to absorb force. Once we identify that, then we go and find out where the actual origin of the pain is coming from, not where it's ending up, because where we feel pain is where it ended up. Like in your case, you felt it in one spot, but it's coming from another spot. Everybody's exactly the same way. Once we get to that point, then the third part of the system is bringing your strength back up to where it was before you got hurt to prevent you from getting hurt in the future. And it's a three-part system, and if one piece of that puzzle is missing, then you're right back to square one.
How did you discover this method of healing?
Well, it's really not a method of healing. What it is a method of addressing a major problem called soft tissue injury. Again, it all boils down to the fact that what we do now is very, very time-consuming and doesn't work. In my opinion, I don't drive a 50 to 100-year-old car, so in my opinion, why do I want to use a 50 to 100-year-old way of dealing with a soft tissue injury? And so it came about from frustration of the length of time it took for injuries to come back from.
What does ARP stand for, ARP?
ARP is an acronym that stands for Accelerated Recovery Performance. And that's exactly what happens in our clinics, is we accelerate your body's recovery from any type of injury or surgery.
Do you do physical therapy then, too? Is that a part of this?
No, absolutely not. We are not physical therapists. We're not athletic trainers. We're not medically trained people. I like to think of us as it's a new type of niche, and that niche is like a bridge. And it's a bridge before you would use medication. It's a bridge before you would see a physical therapist or an athletic trainer. And that bridge just simply makes their job easier. And then after they're done with you, it's a bridge to resolve the strength issue that hasn't been resolved yet.
Well, in my case, I had I guess they call it golfer's elbow or tendonitis or whatever the case may be. Yeah. I had several therapists ice it, do this, do that. They said it could take a long, long time to get an injury. You told me 10 days. I think it was 9 to 10 days. And you said I wouldn't even know I had an injury. My elbow was back to normal.
That's correct, because we found out it wasn't your elbow that was correct. The problem. And is in traditional therapies, we only work on symptoms. In other words, if you say your elbow hurts, I don't have to tell you. They said ice it, do all these other things. All I'm saying is where you feel the pain is where the problem ended up, not at all where it's coming from. So my job is, first off, determine, if you recall in the system, we had you see the doctor after I had muscle tested you to determine was the muscle firing correctly or not, and we found out that it wasn't. We found out that the tendon was a little bit medially shifted. The doctor put that basically back in place. So then, because that muscle hadn't been working correctly, there's a lot of damage caused because it wasn't absorbing the force. So then what I did is I went in and found out, we started right where you said it hurt, and then we went and we looked for where is the problem coming from. And we found out where it was coming from, started to treat that. Now we're resolving the origin, not the symptom. And when you absolve the origin, the symptoms vanish.
Well, I knew I used your system because I was in pain. When would a patient use your services?
You know, anytime someone is hurt, ankle sprain, if they're thinking about surgery, any type of soft tissue injury, we can be of assistance in that process because we allow, through this system, we allow the body to speed up its own recuperative ability. And we have a lot of different techniques that we use as you've gone through those. And the technology is all designed to improve your ability to absorb force and increase your blood supply.
Well, ARP Wave philosophy, you have a distinct philosophy on joint replacement or fusion surgery. Right?
Absolutely.
Right. And that philosophy is?
Well, first off, let's look at, again, if we need a joint replaced, it's because the shock absorbers, the muscles that are supporting that joint, did not work. And so consequently, if they can't absorb force, that force then goes to tissue not designed to absorb the force, the joint. So you don't have a joint problem. You have a muscle problem that's not working to support the joint. So what we do is go in and find out what shock absorber didn't work. And once we identify what shock absorber didn't work, we can resolve the problem pretty quickly.
I'm Dan Cole. We're talking with Dennis Thompson. He is the founder of the ARP Wave system. This show is House of Pain. It's the initial show here on Sunday morning on The Fan. Are there any types of injuries that you can't fix, that there's nothing you can do for?
I don't believe there's any type of injury that cannot be addressed for the simple reason is all injury happens for the exact same reason. It's inability to absorb force. Some muscle didn't do its job. It's either the muscle above the joint or below the joint that didn't do its job. When we look at ACL injuries, we look at elbow injuries, we look at golfer's elbow. All it is a muscle not doing its job. It's inflamed. It can't absorb that force. So if we get it to absorb the force, increase the blood supply, the body will do the rest.
How does, or can your system prevent athletic injuries or what people would call like repetitive tasking?
Oh, for sure. For sure. And again, injury happens for only one reason, inability to absorb force. So in athletics, let's look at athletics as a general rule, and then we'll get into repetitive tasks. But athletic injuries, in my opinion, happen not because the force overloads the muscle and the muscle can't absorb that force. It happens because the muscle isn't turning on fast enough to absorb the force. An example of muscle being overwhelmed with force would be a bus accident, getting hit by a bus. That's too much force for the muscle to absorb. You can never build your body to absorb that kind of force. But athletic injuries, you never, ever get that amount of force. So therefore, what I believe happens is the muscle can't turn on fast enough to where that force is then absorbed by that muscle. So it's like a spark plug. If your spark plug is gapped incorrectly, it can't fire your gasoline. Well, if your muscles aren't getting the proper electrical signal from your nervous system, they're not going to turn on fast enough to absorb that force. So what we do is we identify areas of the body that are out of balance, meaning that the nervous system isn't firing correctly, and then the doctor turns those switches back on. Then what we do is the muscles work by lengthening and shortening. They don't work by stretching. Muscle doesn't stretch, and yet you've been told all your life, stretch for golf, stretch for football, stretch for this. Well, stretching does not stretch muscle. It stretches tendons and ligaments. What you want to do, and the Russians figured it out in the early 50s, you want to relax the muscle to make it more supple and make it longer, not shorter. So what we do is a technique where we loosen you, and if I loosened you, we can improve your golf swing dramatically just by loosening you.
Now, what about the repetitive injury